people want to have like a good beginning of VLC, and that people created it, and there was like this big vision and so on. But no, there wasn't. VLC is part of a bigger project called Videolan, which is a continuation of a project, which is a continuation of a project. And like no one had this great idea. It just happened, and people adapted to what happened. But the idea at the beginning was, it's a student project that was started because the networking non-profit who was managing the student association who was managing the network at the École Centrale Paris, which is a university south of Paris, needed something to justify the need of a new network, right? Because their network was a token ring network from the 1980s that was installed by an alumni of the university who was working at IBM, and it was a 10 megabits token ring network. That was completely fine in 1993, 1994. But there was the beginning of video games, and for that, there was really not enough. So they went and tried to justify why they needed a new network. And one of the reasons why satellite, because they went to see one company who was like partner of the university, and the guy said, you know what, like, instead of buying 2,000 satellite dishes and decoders, just buy one, and that's digital. So send it on the network, and if you're able to do that, I pay you a new network, because that's going to be huge. So this project, which was a new network of the students in 1995, 1996, was called Network 2000, right? And that worked, and maybe they should have stopped there, right? And they had a new network, amazing, 100 megabits per second, and no one cared. But 1 year after the end of the project, 2 students took over and said, well, you know, maybe other universities care about a streaming solution for satellite. And of course, they named it Video on a local network. So it became Videolan. It was not open source. It was Linux only. It was not what it was supposed. What it's known today, right? And in 2001, they managed to open source it, right? Because this university who said, well, this is work of the students, but like we kind of own it and so on. And they, like, of course, had never heard about open source. It's 2001. Like, what the fuck is open source? No one knows. And so the students explain, and finally they agree to that. And when they agree to that, in like a matter of 6 months, the client part, which was just a small part of the solution, which was video and client, was ported on macOS by a student from the Netherlands and another guy who was in United Kingdom that almost no one saw. And it was now on macOS 10, and it was now on Windows. And on macOS, it was the only way to play DVDs, because like there was no way to play DVDs at the time. And because it became open source, people like ported it on Windows and on macOS, in addition to the Linux. But it was not the students of the university who did that. And then people, of course, it was satellites and DVDs because MPEG 2, but because it was open source, people added new codecs and new formats, and it grew. And then 2003, 2004, it started to play really everything. And the name Videolan client was like not really meaningful anymore, because it was not just a client, it was also a server, an encoder, and so on. So it just became VLC. But no one said, oh, I'm going to do an amazing player, it's going to play everything, and I'm going to disrupt the world. That's a movie. That's not real life. No. So there were several steps, right? So at the beginning of the open source part, which was 2001 to 2005, it was like master degree student project at the university, right? So they had like, during the 1 year, they could work on it, and it was like the university was giving them some points for the project part. So they were working. So every year there was a group of students who was basically managing the project and giving direction and coding on it. But the more it went, 2005, it started to be too difficult for the students, because the project was starting to be too big. There were too many bugs, and you couldn't have like students every year coming completely fresh and with no knowledge. So we moved to from a pure developer student project to something where the project almost died in 2006 and 2007, where there was like maybe 2 guys, me, Remy, and Christophe, and that's it. And so then I realized that it wasn't working like that. So I removed the project from the university and created a non-profit, normal EV, and this open source non-profit basically took the assets from the university and the group student and basically retrain all the young professional, old developers and new developers to create a new community around that, which was not tied to the university year, but more long-term. And that's when we were able to finally start redoing the core of VLC in the 0.9 or 1.0 version, because there was lots of very annoying and not fun work to be done, but had to be done in order to be able to grow. And in 2009, I think we arrived at 100 million downloads, which was like really big. And we have the 1.0 version. But 3 years after, we had 1 billion downloads, right? So that's the time where it just explodes. So the reason is mostly because I thought it was the right thing to do, probably about with my the values that my parents gave me. So like this project wasn't mine, right? So of course I could have done it, but that wouldn't have been right? So it's very important to do the right thing for me more than money. So the right thing was to do it well, and I wanted to continue the project but allow it to grow. So we had some transformation, which was around 2007. And what happened also in 2014, it was another transformation that I did, where there is still the nonprofit, and the nonprofit is still the main editor of the software, and I'm still the president, but I created a company to do consulting on it in order to have like more professional work on it and feedback some developments to the community. And this is maybe now one of the largest force around the project, but the goal of the project is still tied to the nonprofit. The nonprofit has almost no money and employs no one. But there are a few companies who use the VLC technology to do different things. And most of the development from those 2 or 3 companies are back to the open source community. So the community has something better. And still we are able to pay people full time and to go on the startup bandwagon, which is a problem, especially in France, because if you just do a non-profit, you have like no state grants, no tax saving, and so on. And if you have startups, you have plenty. There are many cool stories and good stuff I did, and there are many stories where you have people who are very happy, and either they tell us how much money we avoided them to spend, and it's important, or some people explaining that if we're able to export this video with VLC, this is the only way they can remember a lost one, or people who are like in war zones and tell us that VLC is basically the only way to have some entertainment. Those are cool stories, right? But those are just like small stories. What is interesting, and there is no single point, is that to be able to do 20 years of that and not deviate too much from the goal, right? Like people have offered us a fuck ton of money to do bad things, and we've always refused. And like the nonprofit has like almost no money, right? Like if you compare to other big projects, open source project, open culture project, if you see the money that Firefox has, or even Wikipedia, we are not in the same league, right? But I think we have an impact that is almost similar. So, and we managed to do that with like not much, but just people who wanted to do it, and with just the goal of helping the users. I think that's commending, and keeping it, right? Like not dropping it is a difficult part. There are many legal problems around VLC and open source technologies, but of course, as you said, the biggest one is the patent. So far, we've been pretty good in France and the European Union, mostly because those patents are not valid, right? But the push to a singular patent and the European Office and Unitary Patent, especially pushed by Germany. The Germans are extremely bad with that. They are pushing very strongly for software patents, and they're going to probably destroy stuff like VLC at some point. So this is extremely problematic, and we're giving money, a bit of money to various causes and relaying some stuff, but it seems not many of our users actually care or understand the problem. So pushing on the political is the most important, but yeah, it's extremely annoying, and at some point you just get crushed because you cannot do things, right? And one of the things I'm doing is destroying patents by showing how stupid they are and how irrelevant they are. And it's a time fight, right? Because more it goes, the more of those patents go away. So that's good, right? But most of those patents in multimedia are just patents on basic math. It's just like, oh, I took this transformation, this matrix, and I patent those numbers, and you cannot touch them. And like, there is not much value there, to be honest. The VLC community is not alone, right? When you use VLC, for example, VLC is maybe around 1 million lines of code, but we're using so many open source libraries. We're maybe talking about 15 million lines of code, right? So the amount of other software we're using and incorporating in VLC is huge. One of them is FFmpeg, which is probably one of the largest dependency, but there is so many small other projects which are related. So we often contribute upstream, or sometimes we fork them or keep maintaining them. And we help maintaining those. And on FFmpeg, we're also hosting some of the resources they need. So there is close connections around them. And the VLC Dev Days, which is the main conference we're doing, like maybe 1/3 of the people are on the VLC, and the rest 2/3 is Kodi, OBS, FFmpeg, X264, and so many others. So those communities are like really tied, because you cannot be alone, and because we depend too much on the others. So the cone story is probably the most asked question around VLC. The thing is, it's absolutely uninteresting. It's a story, of course, of students, maybe with a bit too much beer, who were playing with like cones that were around the campus where there was some roadworks, and because it was just like a small joke, it became bigger and bigger, and then there was like a huge collection of cones at the École Centrale Paris. And when I joined in 2003 at the École Centrale Paris, there was like hundreds of them. And of course, it arrived on the VLC thing, and it's so idiotic to use a cone for a media player that is so visible, right, and so recognizable. So it's impossible to change now, right? People know VLC as the cone player, right? And like, we couldn't change anything. And it's very distinctible. So there are a few things. There is 3 big projects we're looking at. We are not sure how they're going to work. The first one is to see how we can integrate more external content inside VLC. So we're improving, of course, the video engine, but that's by default, right? But how, like, seeing also that there is like too many people on the same centralized places, how we can help decentralize that, right? Like, how could we play YouTube videos, or which are just video podcasts, right? Inside VLC without having one platform, and how we can relay that. This is one of the main difficulty that we're looking at, very difficult. The second, and we have 2 other ones which are very technical. The first one is about security. So we are looking at how we can sandbox VLC. So whenever you have like a security issue in VLC, it doesn't matter. So people have done that inside web browsers, but we have like constraints that are a bit more difficult, but I think it's important to do them. So that's a second big project. And the third project is how could we run VLC inside the web browser? So inside the like VLC on the web, which plays any type of file, and not the only type that Chrome, this current version, plays, which is a headache for a lot of archivists and professional and so on. So those are 3 of the main projects we're working on. Maybe this year, maybe next, we'll see. And after that, well, I had a crystal ball, I broke it, so I really don't know how to read the future. I'm not sure I like too much the way we are going, where like all the content is on a few platforms who have like almost all powers. And if it's not a monopoly, it's going to be 3 or 4 companies who have like a kind of duo or triplopoly, and I don't like it too much, right? Because the powers move from the creators to the aggregators, and that's not really cool. Well, not what I like. But at the same time, the creators and distributors have abused their position for too long with copyright madness, and I think that we move from something that had difficulties and issues that we knew to another one that we don't know. But the technology is still going on, right? There will be more open video codecs like AV1 or Opus for audio, so the patents issue might be less relevant, I hope. At least I will fight for that. And for the technique, we'll still have like some people who love writing code and seeing assembly, right?